Good evening. Welcome to Not for Black Women Only. I'm Wanda Dorn, your host. I'm with the National Council of Negro Women, Glendale, Burbank, Pasadena sections. Tonight, our show is entitled To Join or Not to Join. That is our question this evening, whether Black women should join the feminist movement. And this evening, to discuss that subject and answer that question for us, we have the students from Occidental College under the direction of Dr. Monique Taylor, who is the professor of sociology at Occidental College. And they have worked up the program for us this evening, so I'm going to turn it over to them, the students of Occidental College.
Thank you. As part of a seminar entitled Black Women in Social Science, we have read several works by African American women that serve as the background for the forthcoming discussion. Among these works are Sister Outsider by Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins' Black Feminist Thought, Labor of Love, Labor of Sorrow by Jacqueline Jones, and Linda Brent's Incidents in the Lives of a Slave Girl. For the past 4 months, the members of this panel have addressed the issue of whether or not Black women should join the feminist movement. Today, we will share 3 possible perspectives as well as some of the problems associated with the question itself. Due to the complexity of the issue, we are unable to answer the question. Instead, we hope to shed some light on the issue. To my left is Carlos Hernandez, who will introduce the discussion, followed by Kisa James, who will share the yes perspective, and Tracy Taylor, the no perspective.
Most of the time, when issues of race and ethnicity surface in the newspaper, political arena, or just among conversations with friends and family, the dialogue inevitably involves a general question like the one which we are attempting to address. A refusal or dismissal of a question like the one posed because of its lack of complexity places one too comfortably within the socially disconnected tower of academia. Within this context, this question forces us as college students to make connections between seemingly disconnected theory and practice. This is especially significant within the discipline of sociology since, after all, social realities constitute our primary object of study. Despite this important theory-praxis consideration, however, our critical position towards the question itself remains the most successful way in which to uncover the complexities underlying the boxing match between the yes and no answers. This question raises important themes which we will attempt to address concerning the relationship between feminism and the Black community. Ultimately, Black women's positioning within and between both the feminist and Black community complicates the agendas of traditional identity politics, which seek to address a singular axis of oppression, that is, are you Black or are you a woman, without incorporating a more complex integration of outside issues or other issues, such as sexuality and class. Indeed, the issue of inside and outside within both the Black community and women's community figures as a central underlying point within this debate. In addressing whether or not Black women should join the feminist movement, we will consider the specific ways in which feminism has been constructed, since definitions are central in defining the various positions within this debate. Vivian Gordon, one of the authors we reviewed within our course, focuses on the Eurocentric underpinnings of many women's studies departments which have failed to integrate the experiences and contributions of Black women, and have thus presented courses which center on the construction of a homogeneous female subject, usually white and privileged. That is, Black women are not considered women. Thus, within this context, Gordon's rejection of feminism does not necessarily entail a denial of the importance of analyses that position gender within a specific Black cultural and historical context. What she is actively and aggressively contesting, however, is the supposed universality of traditional feminism, which grounds itself on a, quote, pervasive unwillingness to acknowledge the distinctively different nature of women, of oppression for white and non-white women. This is an example which emphasizes the importance of specifically defining the concepts and terminology within this debate in order to assure that we are discussing the same thing, as many times we are not. We will begin by focusing on the specific reasons underlying the yes and no positions to the question of whether or not Black women should join the feminist movement in order to begin to address the ideas and concepts underlying each position. We will then continue with an active dialogue in order to develop a more integrated response which serves to re-articulate the question itself.
Hi, I represent the yes portion of why should Black women join the feminist movement, and the yes answer is basically why people would believe that Black women should join the feminist movement and some of the complications involved with it. Reading a quote from Audre Lorde on her book called Sister Outsider, she writes that the failure of academic feminists to recognize difference as a crucial strength is a failure to reach beyond the first patriarchal lesson. In our world, divide and conquer must become define and empower. This fact is only threatening to those women who still define the master's house as their only source of support. The notion that Lord espouses in this book is that through common differences among women and under shared oppression, that all women's issues relate to white, black women, Latina women, lesbian women, and Asian women. And Collins' definition of black feminism as a process of self-conscious struggle that empowers women and men to actualize a humanist vision of community asserts that women as a combined group should address the universal values that have become strategies of dominance, which suggests that women through their commonality should address all the dominant discourse that has basically been put out there to separate them and to put them in lower positions within the social structure. I believe that feminism means listening to silences, filling in historical blanks, and rejecting universal assumptions. And by receiving all points of women's views, you get the complete story. And that is basically a humanist position. Patricia Hill Collins talks about the humanist vision in her book, Black Feminist Thought. And according to this, she makes a distinction between autonomy and separatism. She believes that they're fundamentally different because autonomy comes from a position of strength and separatism comes from a position of fear. And when we're, which means females, are truly autonomous, we can deal with other kinds of people, a multiplicity of issues, and with difference because we have formed a solid base of strength. And for those women who believe that that the feminist movement connotes to white women, which it has historically been, sociologist Bell Hooks suggests that we shift from statements such as, I am a feminist, to those such as, I advocate feminism, because then that takes away all the racial connotations, if it's just semantics that is getting in the way of black women and white women and other women of color and non-color coming together to bridge the gap that separates them. If the term feminist and the image that the word evokes is the cause of all the backlash, then black women should create their own space within the movement. They should place their own historical meaning to feminism in the context in which it best applies to them, namely that it was their struggle that caused white women to realize they had a cause to fight for, not to mention all the black feminist activists that did and are fighting issues regarding gender and sexism. So lastly, I would like to discuss in the yes argument a quote from Alice Walker where she says, I believe that the truth about any subject only comes when all sides of the story are put together and all their different meanings make one new one. Each writer writes the missing parts to the other writer's story, and the whole story is what I'm after. And the gist of Walker's statement is that black women don't hold the truth to one reality, and that she calls for all women to tell their versions of their story in order to create one full one. So the notion of even there being like a black feminist perspective coming from one group of people, or a feminist perspective coming from one group of people, is just slants the issue. Many people who would disagree with the yes stance of should black women join the feminist movement argue that the knowledge of black women oftentimes becomes ghettoized by European patriarchal Western frame of reference, meaning that the knowledge of black women becomes distorted to be what white women think the black female experience is. And that's a valid argument, and that has happened before, and it's historical. And then other complications would be how white women think they can use tools of patriarchy to elevate themselves. If white women don't believe that they are minorities or that they too are oppressed, then the bridging the gaps can never occur because they don't believe that that they're actually being oppressed. So if those two issues complicate my yes, but for the most part, I believe that in the humanist worldview that says that all women should address the universal values that have become strategies of dominance. And one woman that we read in Patricia Collins' book was talking about how it's radical to form coalitions with others, and I believe that's true. Black women, although it's not stated that they always get along, I think it's easier to come together on issues within a group, but I think it's more radical to try and break out of your group and build coalitions. And that's the yes perspective.
My name is Tracy Taylor, and I'm presenting the opposition. I do not believe that Black women should join the feminist movement, because to do so would ignore the particular characteristics and experiences of Black women. Historically, Black women have been excluded from the forefronts of the civil rights movement and women's liberation. The civil rights movement was dominated by men's issues. The women's liberation movement motivated women to form their political identities, but Black women were motivated to pursue economic opportunity. The basis of my position is summed up in Toni Morrison's quote: "Black women had nothing to fall back on, not maleness, not whiteness, not ladyhood, not anything, and out of the profound description of her reality, she may have very well invented herself. Black women had nothing to fall back on, not maleness, not like Black men in the civil rights movement, not whiteness, not like white women in the women's liberation movement, not ladyhood, not anything."
On the no side there, you mentioned something about the economic part, that was the concentration of the Black woman in the past. Mm-hmm. Has that not changed in the recent years?
I don't think it's changed. Basically because if you think about all the single-headed female families, the number one the primary goal in those families is to provide for those households. That has not changed since slavery.
Well, does the fact that the statistics state that there are more Black women with college degrees than there are white males, does that still not change that? And that at least 60% of the Black people are not in the poverty level, but in the middle class level, that still does not address that?
60% in the middle class level?
Or upper.
Well,
that would not change your...
No, it wouldn't change because personally, I believe that Black women right now, whether they are in college or whether they are in the job market, are still striving towards the same primary goal, and that is to provide for themselves and their family. Most of the Black women I know personally that are at the stage where I am as a senior public policy major at Occidental College are thinking about their families. I don't have children, I don't have a husband, but I have a mother who is at home that has raised me and my brother. Mm-hmm. And my first primary goal is to get a job and to give back to my parents, my mother rather.
Well, I see the point that you're making there, because I do, in my book, I remember writing a statement that Black women were raised and trained to take care of themselves, right, whereas white women were raised and trained to get a husband or someone else to take care of them. That may fall a little bit true. But would you explain to me a little bit, we only have about 30 seconds to explain, what is the feminist movement?
The feminist movement is an abstract concept. I couldn't give you a concrete definition because acts within the home, acts outside of the home, could be considered larger parts of the movement, or smaller parts of the movement.
We'll be right back, and we'll have some more discussion on the feminist movement.
Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides, just like hope springing high, still I rise, bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the hope and the dream of the slave, and so I rise, I rise, I rise.
Welcome back to Not for Black Women Only, and the question is to join or not to join. And we're here again with Occidental students. We've changed 2 students. We've got 2 new ones. Could you introduce yourselves?
My name's Megan Kelly, and this is Memory Roque Jackson, and we're returning to our question. I'm representing the maybe position of the question, should Black women join the feminist movement? The maybe position is not a position of ambivalence or indecision, rather is a direct call to action. As Carlos said earlier, too often these questions are divided into an either-or discussion, and we don't integrate the complexities and many interests of Black women. I think Black women can do both. They can separate, but also come back to form coalitions. This creates a both-and structure. First, Black women need to find a space that centers on the Black female experience. There they can form a whole identity that is not in contrast to anyone else, but centers on themselves. This is also a safe and honest environment where they can support each other. There they can make art, write their literature, form an epistemology centered on Black women. This counters the marginalized position that they've traditionally been put into. Then I think Black women need to take these strong identities and move to form coalitions with other people based on issues, not identity. Coalitions, rather than identity-based movements, move away from the idea of forming an authentic self or an authentic experience that makes other people invisible and marginalizes people. Also in coalitions, difference is very important. They're not looking for a consensus or a total agreement. Rather, coalitions take difference as a asset, as a value. And with the differences, by criticizing yourselves, your opinion is strengthened. Audre Lorde says, "Difference is the raw and powerful connection from which our personal power is forged." So in coalitions, difference is looked at not as a weakness as it normally is, but as a strength. Issue-oriented coalitions allow Black women to use their resources of other groups, to use other groups' powers and numbers without sacrificing their identities. Harriet Jacobs, in her narrative, Incidents in a Life of a Slave Girl, appeals to white women to fight against slavery, to form abolitionist groups. But at the same time, Harriet Jacobs was not advocating a complete merger of white women and Black women that would bind them at the hip and make their identities synonymous. I want to end with an image from Toni Morrison's Beloved. In it, 3 Black women lock themselves into a home in order to share their memories of slavery and the cruelty white people have done to them. This isolation is necessary for a time and to go back to because it creates a strength within Black women. When one of them asks, "How can I go out into the society and face the pain and the cruelty that is all around?" Baby Suggs says, "Know it and then go out into the yard." I think this scene is very representative of my stance. It says to know yourself and form very strong bonds between Black women, but then to go out actively to form coalitions to change things. The maybe stance is a very direct call to action.
So for the remainder of the program, we decided that we would flip the question around and attempt to answer, should the feminist movement join Black women? And essentially, is the feminist movement capable of joining Black women? So in answering this question, the feminist movement has a responsibility to look internally at itself and own lots of the racial oppression that it has contributed to. Because the feminist movement has been based in a very particular experience, one of white middle-class women, the issues that it has chosen to put on its agenda have not been synonymous with issues for Black women, such as a right to work or trying to eliminate a pedestal in which white women were placed on. Because as we all know, Black women were brought to this country as slaves, forced to work and forced to procreate, to create essentially more slaves. So even if the feminist movement is capable of revamping its agenda and essentially including Black women as opposed to marginalizing them, will this be the best forum for Black women to work within? Should the feminist movement become an ally for Black women, or can there be a universal women's movement? So let's open it up and see how the yes, no, maybe positions that we've discussed to the previous question change, or if they change at all when answering the question, should the feminist movement join Black women?
Memory, to address that question, I think that it's a question that's, what's that term? It's a day late and a dollar short. Because I feel like in order to address that question, that means that white women have to identify with the experiences of black women, and that's impossible because that risks homogenizing all the particular traits, characteristics, and experiences of black women. For example, sexism, the type of sexism that my grandmother, great-grandmother, and beyond have experienced are not the same as your ancestors. The types of gender issues that they face are not the same as the type of gender issues that you faced. So to even pose that question does not do justice to the position that I presented, because there is something about the history of the treatment of black women that is different from any other that you can even think of. So to me, it would homogenize the particular interests and characteristics and experiences of black women, and by the same token, it would homogenize all the other interests, other groups in terms of issues of sexuality and any other you can think of. When I say other, it's in terms of object. When we speak of dualisms, like Collins speaks of dualisms in her book, and dualisms present a subject and an object. And basically, the white male has been the subject, and the black female or black people have been the object. But when you break it down, and I'm talking about the particular, the subject is the white male, or the white woman in this case, and the object becomes the black woman. And I do not think that the question to incorporate white women into the black women's movement will justifiably address the particular interests of black women.
So essentially, you believe that there should be separate women's movements for black and white women. Are there any benefits in having a universal women's movement at all? I'm curious to see what anyone's response would be on that.
Well,
Or do you think that specific groups are best represented with specific agendas and specific movements, as Tracy has said in the case of black women? Does this mean that we should have separate movements for black lesbians, for young black women, for middle-class black women, for middle-class white women, for lower-class white women? Or where do we stop drawing the line? Or is that problematic and to continue to draw lines?
Well, I think I took the question in a completely different turn than Tracy did. I thought the question, should the feminist movement join black women, suggests a reversal of pursuer and pursuee. You know, I think her question addresses the fact that black women have been excluded, thereby there was this at least willingness to come together for issues like that. Like in the 60s movement, black women did go to the larger, like now the National Organization for Women, but were expelled because of the fact that, you know, all white women claimed that their oppression was the same, and didn't want to hear the noise of that black women were saying that I have a different experience. And I think by switching it, it just says, okay, black women have attempted to join the feminist movement. It's like, what else can they do? Should the feminist movement, like, openly embrace black women, you know, and not try to deny their realities, deny their existence, but basically open up dialogue? And I guess I was thinking of Memory's question in that sort of way, not where they're kind of melting into one person, or even trying to understand what black women have went through, because, you know, I agree with you that they couldn't. But at the same instance, I think the doors have been shut by the feminist movement, as opposed to black women initially saying, well, I don't want to be involved. And I think historically it's been an issue of black women going to these movements and then being rejected, and then having to devise ways in which to do like a counter agenda when they weren't being heard.
I think in that instance, then it should be different groups joining a feminist movement, because when you talked about how black women joined the feminist movement with now back in the day, they were joining a feminist movement. But in the eyes of those white women, they were joining our feminist movement. So I think that what you're talking about is going to have to be this realization that we are having a feminist movement where we all are coming together, not necessarily in a melting pot, but as a salad bowl, as one of our professors on Occidental's campus likes to say, where all the particular interests will be flowering in that pot.
I think what's interesting with that is how the idea of joining a movement, and it has been historical that when you join a movement, you're taking on that whole movement's agenda, and you're taking on an identity that's already pre-planned,
Right.
and it's not allowing for change to happen in the movement. So when you talk of the feminist movement, it is historically defined as a white women's movement, and they feel threatened by the idea of difference. And I think what's really, to add on to it, it also assumes that there's a single black woman's experience,
Right.
you know, or a single white woman's experience, and doesn't add in a lot of other issues. I think what's great with Audre Lorde, her title of her book that we read was Sister Outsider, and she's a black lesbian, and she's both a sister, but she's outside of the definitions of what a black woman should be, and she isn't. She hasn't been embraced by the black female community. So there's lots, and class is involved in that too. You know, class divisions. There's a lot of different levels of.
I hate to cut you off,
Yeah.
Megan, but we need to wrap up
yeah.
our program. So, in conclusion, what we've attempted to answer here today are two different questions. Should black women join the feminist movement? And should the feminist movement join black women? In the process, we've examined the different stances that arise with that, yes, no, maybe positions, and attempted to examine how they fluctuate. Kisa?
Oh yeah, just we're going to discuss the ways in which the answers fluctuated amongst the people on stage, and how when the question is reversed, you know, is it different? But I noticed that people who basically stay to their argument, which shows how the subjectivity,
We just don't have enough time to finish this topic because we could go on for, I have a lot of
Right,
questions I'd like to ask you guys, but
Sure.
we just have to end. We only have a 30-minute show today. We're going to have you back to discuss
Okay.
this issue, because I think back in the suffragette days, the women's voting rights issues came up, and it was a joint issue for black women and white women. But I think that they were threatened politically by not having black women in the issue, and I think that may be part of what the discussion here is about. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time
Thank you.
on
Thank
Not for
you.
Black Women Only.